When I woke up, the day seemed promising with no hint of impending disaster. The alarm went off at 5 o'clock, and my wife, Diana, reached out and tucked me back into bed just as I was about to get up. Even after 25 years, she was still able to make me weak to my knees. While she was making coffee, I took a quick shower and then made breakfast for both of us. While we were eating, we chatted about our plans for the day, and Diana casually asked, "Do you mind meatloaf and baked potatoes for dinner tonight?" "Today, I will go to the bakery, buy a loaf of fresh French bread, and maybe a pie with nuts." "Oh, the pecan pie. It always beckons me." After kissing sweetly, we walked hand in hand into the garage to go to work. The trip was uneventful, and the morning flew by unnoticed. But at 11 a.m., my boss Harry called me into his office to discuss the situation in St. Louis. Baker was caught by Smithers and his wife, as a result of which Baker ended up in prison and Smithers in the hospital. Since there's no one to manage the office, you are asked to fly urgently on the 220th flight to St. Louis to head the office. The length of your stay will depend on the severity of Baker's actions and how long it will take Smithers to recover. It is unknown when they will be released, but even if that happens, the consequences may remain. It's hard for me to imagine how they can work effectively together. I need to think carefully about my options, but it seems the only solution is to break up with one of them. At the moment, I do not know which of them to let go. I need more information before making a decision. In my opinion, the situation is simple. Smithers was having an affair with Baker's wife, so it's not surprising that Baker got angry when he found out about it. I cannot confirm whether Baker caught Smithers in the act and that Smithers is indeed guilty. All I can rely on is what the secretary told me on the phone. Perhaps you can get more information when you arrive. I tried to contact Diana to inform her about the situation, but her secretary informed me that she was in a meeting, promising to call back later. I returned home to pack my things. To my surprise, Diana's car was parked in the driveway, which made me wonder why she was at home when she was supposed to be at a meeting. When I went into the living room, I found that she was indeed in a meeting, although it was not the meeting I had originally thought of based on her secretary's message. Clothes were scattered on the floor, forming a path from the sofa to the stairs, and some things clearly belonged to a man. I noticed a pair of men's trousers at the bottom of the stairs. Curious, I picked them up and found a wallet in one of the back pockets. I took out my wallet, opened it, and saw the name on the driver's license, deciding to keep the wallet for myself. I continued to search the room and found a coat draped over an upholstered armchair. There was a checkbook in my coat pocket, which I also put in my pocket. After climbing the stairs, I stopped at the very top, intrigued by what else I could find. I heard sounds coming from the bedroom. More. "I like you. You feel so good with me." I couldn't believe how passionate they were. When I entered the room, I saw a man enter Diana, and her legs wrapped around him, pulling him closer. She made sounds of pleasure. As I passed by, heading for the closet, I had almost reached the closet door when Stanton North noticed me. He immediately stopped his actions and exclaimed, "Oh!" Diana, whose eyes were closed during this meeting, opened them in surprise and pleaded, "Don't stop, damn it, don't stop." When she saw me, she screamed, "No, oh my God, no," and tried to break out from under North. "Don't stop," I reassured them, going into the pantry. "I just need to pack my bag, and then I'll leave you lovebirds alone." I turned away from them, gathering socks and underwear into a suitcase from a drawer. But their voices still sounded in the room. Diana's words were full of disappointment when she asked someone to get off her, and North commented on the chaotic situation. When I turned to get a bag of clothes from the closet, I saw North coming out of the bedroom and Diana frantically looking for something to cover herself with. Among her frantic movements, she repeated phrases like, "What are you doing, Frank?" and "I can explain, Frank." Trying to figure out the situation while she was talking, I heard the front door slam and asked where North was going. There was only Diana's car in the driveway, which indicated that he had arrived with her. Ignoring Diana, I continued to pack my things, not wanting to delve into her requests to talk. "We need to talk, Frank. You have to let me explain everything," she insisted, without saying a word. From the moment I entered the bedroom and told them to keep working without me, I walked out the front door. Diana's crying haunted me as I walked to my car. "Wait, "Frank, don't go, please, talk to me." I opened the car door and looked around, but there was no sign of Stanton North. I couldn't help but wonder if he was watching from afar, waiting for me to leave before making his move. Just as I was about to leave, Diana rushed to the car and reached for the passenger door. I managed to drive off in time, narrowly avoiding a possible accident. My thoughts were racing. I couldn't focus on the road. How did it happen? Why did this happen? I was sure that Diana and I were in a stable condition. Looking back on our life together, I couldn't find anything that could prepare me for what I had just witnessed. How could she do this to me? Diana and I crossed paths when, because of my father's work, we had to move 1,000 kilometers away. The move was not easy for me, leaving my childhood friends and familiar surroundings. I found myself in a new school where I did not know anyone. During lunch in the school cafeteria, I sat alone at the table and felt sorry for myself. Suddenly, the most beautiful girl I've ever seen came up to me and sat down. After setting down the tray, she smiled affably and introduced herself as Diana. Without hesitation, she held out her hand to shake, and I thought for a moment before introducing myself as Frank. Curious about my background, Diana asked where I was from, and a conversation ensued that filled the rest of the lunch break, during which we got to know each other better. She sat at the table with me and understood my difficulties because she herself had faced the same situation a year earlier. Even before the call, we agreed that she would give me a tour of the city. Just 6 weeks later, we were officially dating and behaving like typical teenagers, kissing passionately. As a young man with strong desires, I tried to convince Diana to go further in our physical relationship, but she remained steadfast in her commitment to her mother's desire to remain innocent until marriage. Fortunately, my peace of mind was saved when she decided to break that promise on her 18th birthday. We had some serious conversations after the night she lost her virginity to me. I expressed my desire to marry her but explained that I wanted to wait until I graduated from college. She nevertheless wanted to tie the knot immediately and was upset by my decision to wait. After telling my mom everything I thought about the situation, I was stunned by her unexpected reaction. Despite the fact that Mom has always been a somewhat conservative person, she surprised me by suggesting, "Why don't you move in together and live together until you graduate from college?" I was left wondering how to do it. I want to wait until I can afford it. I can't support my wife and go to college at the same time. You may have to find a part-time job to help with groceries, but your college savings are enough to rent a small apartment off campus. After discussing this with Diana, we both agreed to find a part-time job. We searched and found an inexpensive apartment and then faced the difficult task of informing her parents about it. Diana's mother was shocked to learn that she had not kept her promise to remain innocent. She cried and sobbed, and Diana's father angrily called me names and forbade her to ever see me. Diana asked me to wait in the car while she went into the house. 10 minutes later, she came out with 2 suitcases without explaining what had happened. It took 3 years before she spoke to her parents again, informing them of the birth of her grandson. All of a sudden, I became a good guy for Diana, and their daughter was lucky to have me. But despite their best efforts, the damage had already been done. I just tolerated them, not accepting them into my life. In the end, Diana forgave them, and they became involved in our lives, becoming wonderful grandparents to our children. But deep down, I still just tolerated them. Years passed, our children grew up and left home, and I ended up at the airport, thinking about my life. At least our children won't have to feel the pain of their parents getting divorced. Sitting in one of the airport coffee shops, I checked in for a flight in advance and waited for the call. Rummaging through North's wallet and checkbook, I found a card labeled emergency information hidden behind his driver's license. Among such information as blood type, I was attracted by the name Alls North listed as a contact person in an emergency situation, and in the relationship column, it was listed as wife. Without wasting any time, I dialed the specified number on my mobile phone. "Mrs. North, my name is Frank Bellows. I'm sorry to call, but I recently discovered your husband in a compromising situation with my wife. It seemed important to me that you find out about this. Are you kidding?" "No, unfortunately, I'm not joking. I know it's hard to believe, but I assure you it's true. I know my husband. He would never do anything like that. Let me prove it to you. When he gets home tonight, ask him about a man named Diana Bello, and then ask him to show his wallet and checkbook. He will not be able to fulfill this request, as they are currently with me. I found him without his clothes when I got home early. I'm at the airport now, waiting for a flight to St. Louis. I'll be happy to give them to you when I get home. Are you serious? I'm sorry, but it's true. When are you going to come back? I do not know for sure. I need to replace a sick colleague until he can return to work. Could you mail me the wallet and checkbook? I can, but I'll let you know in advance. After what I saw, I want to drown my sadness in alcohol, and I plan that your husband will pay the bill for it. There are $87 in your husband's wallet. There may still be money left, but I'm not sure how much. Please send them to my office. She gave me the address, which I wrote down, and then added, and if you can send it at night, I'll make it up to you. I agreed. When my flight was announced, I had to say goodbye and hang up. North was lucky. Initially, I planned to leave his wallet and credit cards in the bathroom, hoping that whoever finds them will go shopping. But after contacting his wife, I changed my mind. I hoped she would make his life miserable. Since I left the house, my phone has been buzzing nonstop, and Diana has called every time. I ignored the calls. As I was leaving the cafe, the phone rang again. I thought it was Diana, but it was actually a call from the office. I called back, and Harry answered me, telling me to call home. Diana just called me in a panic because she can't get through to you, Harry. The reason is simple. I deliberately avoid her calls. After making sure that the office was working smoothly and there were no urgent matters, I immediately went to the post office to send Mrs. North her husband's wallet and checkbook. I gave her my contact details in case she had any questions. After that, I contacted the police to find out about Baker's whereabouts and whether I could visit him. Despite bruised knuckles and a broken finger, Baker appeared to be in relatively good condition. He had not yet passed a bail hearing, as authorities were awaiting information from the hospital about Smithers' condition in order to determine the appropriate charges. I informed him of Harry's concern and asked him to tell me about the incident, which seemed eerily familiar to me. He said that he returned home during his lunch break to pick up a previously forgotten item and found that Smithers had entered into an affair with his wife. In a fit of rage, he attacked Smithers, and his wife called 911, saying that her husband had lost control of himself, and she feared for her life. Police arrived at the scene. Smithers was taken to the hospital, and Baker was arrested. I decided to visit Smithers at the hospital. He had a broken nose, 2 ribs, and 2 cracked ribs, and his right testicle was removed. He insisted that the incident was not his fault because Baker's wife climbed up herself, and he did not stop her. As a single man who loves to make love, he considers his actions justified. He blamed Baker, saying that if he had taken care of his wife properly, she would not have left him. He had no sympathy for Baker. I called Harry and told him about the situation, offering to transfer Smithers from the office if there were no legal grounds for his dismissal. I assured Harry that I would carefully study the dynamics of the office to find out if there was any evidence there that he could use. Baker's hearing was held the next day, and bail was set at $250,000. He decided to use his house as collateral to get the necessary funds. His wife refused to sign the papers, and he remained languishing in prison until his father and brother came up with something. The next morning, Rose North called me at 9:30 a.m. and said she had asked her husband if he knew Diana Bello. His face had lost all color, and he denied knowing anyone by that name. She also asked him for his wallet and checkbook, but he quickly changed the subject and asked about dinner instead. He understands perfectly well that he has serious problems, but their extent remains a mystery until tomorrow when I will again demand his wallet and checkbook. Do you have information about how long this has been going on? I only know what I came across, and I immediately left. What did your wife say? I have no idea. I haven't spoken to her since I found them together, and I'm not going to do that until I get home. When you talk to her, please let me know. I would like to compare their explanations. I will definitely call you. Diana called me every day, but I preferred not to answer any of them. It seems that Harry informed her of my location in St. Louis, as a result of which she got the office number from the directory. When Dixie, our secretary, informed me about the call on line 3, I reluctantly answered, finding Diana on the other end. "What do you need, Diana?" I asked. She replied, "We need to talk, Frank. I have to make it clear that everything is not what it seems." Not being in the mood to engage in conversation, I replied sharply, "I'm not in the mood to talk to you right now. I am still full of anger at you and have cruel thoughts of harming you and your lover. He's not my lover. Please stop defending yourself, Diana. Don't contact me again until I get home." I abruptly cut off the call. Later in the afternoon, Baker's father informed me that bail had been posted for him, and he would be released the next day. I was kind of disappointed by this news, as it meant that I would have to meet with Diana as soon as I returned home. Since Baker had already been released from prison and Smithers was recovering in the hospital, that evening I had dinner and drank again and returned to my room around 7 o'clock. The phone rang, and since only Harry and Aruz North had my number, I decided to answer it. Aruz was at the other end. After exchanging greetings, she told me about what was happening on her side. Later in the evening, I asked my husband for his wallet and checkbook again. He said they weren't in his office when he got there. He suspects that one of the cleaners took them and plans to file a complaint. The next morning, I laughed. How much longer is he thinking of putting it off? I don't know how long he thought he could, but I stopped him. I asked him how stupid he thought I was. I informed him that he was caught when I mentioned your wife's name and then demanded his wallet and checkbook. He knew that there was no other way I could connect the two things, but then he said he didn't know anything, and that made me angry. Then I took his wallet and checkbook out of my purse and threw them in his face. I explained how I got them and told him that I had contacted his office and found out that he was working with a woman who was posing as a stranger. After that, I lied to him. I informed him that upon your return from St. Louis, you plan to visit me and share the photos you took on your cell phone camera before anyone knew of your presence. How did he react to this? In the end, he admitted his deception, repented, asked for forgiveness, and stated that this was the only case of infidelity. He explained that he couldn't resist your wife's advances because she had been stalking him for several months, and it was difficult for him to resist a gorgeous woman who desired him. It's a pity that I didn't realize when I caught them doing this. I have a camera on my mobile phone, but it never occurred to me to use it. Do you think his explanation is plausible? Was she really stalking him? It's quite possible. She's not the first one to do this. Was it just a one-time occurrence? Perhaps, but he was clearly lying when he claimed that this was his only case of infidelity. I know of at least 3 cases of his infidelity. Well, that's not exactly true. 3 different people told me about his infidelity while I was visiting relatives. I never told him about it because I didn't want to know if it was true. You mentioned that maybe Diana was stalking him and that she wasn't the first. Why did you say that? Stan is very rich, and some women are interested in finding out. I used to think that Diana would never do anything like this, but that was before I caught her with your husband. It's time for me to leave, but I'll keep you posted if I find out anything else. Don't forget to talk to her when you get home. I won't forget. The next day at 11 a.m., Ray Baker called me and informed me that he had been released from prison on bail. He said he needed to resolve some personal issues before the end of the day, and the next day, his wife has obtained a restraining order against him, so he needs to find temporary housing and negotiate with the court for access to the house for his belongings. He assured me that he would be back at work on Thursday. I quickly called Harry and informed him of the situation. I also informed him that I had discovered Smithers' fake expense reports and said that this could serve as a reason for his dismissal. I also mentioned that I plan to return home on Thursday evening, and on Friday, I need a day off to attend to personal matters. I assured him that I would be back at the office on Monday morning. The next 2 days passed without problems, and on Thursday morning, Ray returned to work. I told him about the updates in the office and shared my personal problems. I asked how things were going at home. A restraining order limits my distance to her to 500 feet, but I can enter the house when she is not there. If she refuses to leave when I want to enter, I must be accompanied by a person appointed by the court. I waited until she left for work, and then I went into the house with my brother to pick up what I needed. I have no reason to come back. I am not sure of her intentions as she has received a restraining order. She didn't have access to bank accounts. I emptied them yesterday. Although in a state where there is no fault property and a divorce is usually divided 50-50, I do not seek a divorce but simply to leave. If she decides to file for divorce, she will have to cover the costs and be entitled to only half of our assets at the time of filing, which are not currently available. We used the second mortgage on the house to complete the basement and make a recreation room out of it, so there is no capital in the house, and the money I took from the bank has long been gone. I can say that I needed everything to start with a clean slate and a new place after she kicked me out of the house. Speaking of which, I need to contact Harry to update the insurance and other necessary details. Did she explain why she did that? I haven't spoken to her since the police took me away, and I don't have any desire. The reason does not matter, only the fact itself is important. I decided to take some time off before standing in front of Diana and talking and booked a morning flight with the airline. When I woke up, I felt refreshed, had a hearty breakfast, and then took the shuttle to the airport. By 11 a.m., I was at home in Denver. I went to the bank, withdrew all the money from our savings, cashed 5 out of 9 certificates of deposit from the safe, and transferred the funds to the checking account. Diana was still at work, so I had the house to myself until 6. I called the credit card companies to find out the loan balances and ended up canceling all but 5. I decided to keep the American Express card for business expenses and 2 other cards in my name and issued 2 cards in Diana's name. I went to the bank to set up electronic transfers for card repayment using funds from the checking account. After completing this task, I used half of the remaining money in the checking account to open a new account exclusively in my name. In addition, I bought another safe in my name and put 2 of the 4 remaining CDs in it. After which, I went home. When the children grew up and moved away, I turned one of their bedrooms into a home office and study, leaving the other 2 as spare rooms for the duration of their visits. For myself, I chose a spare bedroom next to the study and laid out all my things. When Diana returned home, she called me, but I pretended not to hear her. While she searched the house, she eventually found me upstairs, but I continued to ignore her. "Frank, we really need to talk," Diana pleaded. I turned to her, feeling a surge of anger. How could I talk to a woman who betrayed me like that? But I knew we had to discuss our finances. "Okay, let's talk about finances," I conceded. Diana flinched at my words, but I told her to go downstairs and wait for me at the kitchen table. Having gathered the necessary papers, I joined her at the table, ready to discuss the changes that needed to be made. During my absence, I had enough time to think about my next actions, and in the end, I decided not to do anything. I noticed a flicker of relief on her face, but it disappeared when I clarified that by saying do nothing, I meant to distance myself from her. The divorce process turned out to be unnecessary given my age and lack of desire to remarry. If she wants to get divorced, let her get divorced at her own expense. In the meantime, we'll have to make some adjustments. I have described in detail how I will manage my credit cards, savings, CDs, and checking account during my absence. You have the opportunity to keep your original safe deposit box, but I suggest opening your own checking and savings account. We can keep the old joint account as a family account. The family account will be used for family expenses. I handed her a list of necessary expenses: mortgage, electricity, telephone, gas, water, sewage, taxes, and insurance. From today on, we will live together as roommates. In the future, you will have to transfer half of the amount indicated in the document to our family account every month. We will live in the same house except for 2 rooms. The bedroom will belong to you, and I'll take Carol's old room. Why are you moving into Carol's room? You should sleep with me in the master bedroom. You think I'd want to live in a bedroom after witnessing what happened there? I cannot stay in this room, sleep on this bed, or even communicate with a woman who participated in these events. Frank, we need to talk about what you saw. It may not be what you think. I understand why you think that, but it was just a physical connection. There was no emotional connection, just curiosity. My feelings for you have always been strong and unshakable. What happened to Stan was purely physical and nothing more. I only did it once out of curiosity, and if you hadn't come home, you would never have found out, and it wouldn't have happened again. But the thing is, Diana, I came home, and now I know, and that changes everything. You betrayed me, which means I can't trust you. And if I can't trust you, then I have to question everything you say to determine if it's true or false. You claim to love me, but can you really love me and betray me at the same time? Can you really love me and still disrespect me by bringing another man into our house and lying on our bed with him? On the very bed we're going to share tonight? How can I trust your love and respect when you offer me another man's leftovers after I would have made love to you, Diana? I can't trust you anymore. You claim it was a one-time mistake, but can I believe you? I only have your word, but your actions suggest otherwise. It could easily have happened before, and you might have planned to do it again. But most importantly, even if it's true, you betrayed me. You reneged on the promise you made to me when we got married. And all for what? To satisfy your curiosity? What are you so interested in that you're willing to risk our marriage for this? She turned away and answered, the size of his manhood. I couldn't believe it. Size? Why are you interested in this? Some of the women in the office met with him and talked about how big he was and how funny he was. I listened to all their stories, but I didn't pay attention until he started flirting with me. It took me a moment to realize that he was trying to seduce me. But who doesn't like feeling wanted? The fact that a man 10 years younger than me showed interest in me at my age gave me confidence. I had lunch with him several times and danced with him a couple of times during office gatherings. But it was while dancing with him that I began to think about the rumors that were circulating about him. I could feel his size when he snuggled up to me, and this further fueled my curiosity. I was inexperienced when I met you, and you're the only man I've ever been intimate with. The idea of being with someone else, especially someone like Stan, who was rumored to be very rich, intrigued me. Despite my doubts, I eventually succumbed to curiosity and let my desires get the better of me. Have you heard all the other girls gossiping about Stan's size and his success in bed? How many girls have talked about it? 7. So Stan slept with all the family? That's what they claimed. 7 of them are only in your office. Stan seemed to be pretty free. Have you ever thought about the fact that a guy who so much can catch a couple of diseases? Don't make me laugh, Frank. If that were true, he would have passed them on to the girls he slept with, and everyone in the office would already know about it. Diana, you can get sick without even knowing it. Sometimes the symptoms may not appear for months. I advise you to get tested. Frank, the main thing is that Stan was insignificant to me. There was no feeling of love or even special empathy. Maybe everything sounded different when you came in, but you know how much I enjoy the process and how I screamed during intimacy with you, so I made some noise. I made a mistake, Frank, but it's not because I have feelings for Stan. I deeply regret this. I love you, Frank, and I'm really sorry for what I did. I promise it will never happen again. Please don't throw away 25 years of our life together because of one mistake. I'm not throwing anything away, Diana. You're the one who threw everything away by bringing another man into our house and into our bed. I got up from the kitchen and headed upstairs to the closet, immersed in paperwork. Despite the fact that I like to sleep, that night I was woken up by the sound of the bedroom door opening about an hour after I went to bed. Diana quietly entered the room, closing the door behind her. It was a warm summer night, and I was lying naked on a blanket. Diana bent down and kissed me. Her familiar touch could melt me like butter. It seemed like she was trying to win me over again, using her charm to bridge the gap between us. When I pushed her away, she was in complete shock. Leave me alone, Diana. I'm not interested in leftovers from your lover, I told her firmly. With tears in her eyes, she got out of bed and left the room. 20 minutes later, I fell asleep, and no one bothered me until the morning. The next morning, Diana was in the kitchen making coffee when I came downstairs after a shower. I returned her greeting with an indifferent grunt and continued to ignore her until the coffee was ready. I filled my travel mug and, without saying a word, got to work. After waiting for 10 o'clock, I called Alls North and told her the information I had found. She mentioned that there are 7 other girls involved in the case. It seems your husband had a reputation as an Officer Romeo. Can I trust her story? Before I caught her with your husband, I would have believed her even if she had said that the sun rises in the west. But now, I'm not sure about that. This may be true, or maybe she's just trying to make her act seem plausible, making me think that it doesn't really mean anything. It's hard to say trust was lost when I caught her red-handed. All her words are now perceived as selfishness. Have you decided what you're going to do? The marriage can be over, but if the divorce takes place, she must be the initiator. My current strategy is just to live together. We will share the living space as roommates, nothing more. I'm not going to risk my financial stability just because she couldn't stay faithful. What about you? Have you made a decision yet? I'm still weighing everything. Stay in touch, Frank. We'll figure it out. Good luck. Over the next week, I tried to leave before Diana woke up and busied myself with things so as not to come home late. Even if she was waiting for me when I returned, I preferred to ignore her. When the weekend came, she tried to sneak into my bed again, but I strongly demanded that she stay away from me and leave me alone. Don't do this to me, Frank, she begged. I love you, and I want you. I don't want you, Diana. You're not right for me, I replied. Oh my God, Frank, it was only once. I haven't even spoken to him since he left home. Frank, I made a mistake in my judgment, just once. Please give me a chance. I know I was wrong, and I'm really sorry. I promise you that it will never happen again. The problem is, Diana, I can't be sure that it was only once. He could have been your third or fourth lover, or even your 10th. Maybe you still meet him during your lunch break at the motel. When I caught you with him, you destroyed my trust. Trust, Diana, I can't bring myself to believe a word you say anymore. Please, Frank, there has to be a way to fix this. I will do everything, absolutely everything. I'm sorry, Diana, but we can't make up because I don't want to do this anymore. Seeing you with North, hugging him and begging for more, I completely extinguished all my feelings for you. But look at it from the other side. Now you are free to fulfill your desires without any restrictions. Not in this house. This place is forbidden for this kind of activity. You can find partners elsewhere, and I'll do the same. I have no intention of giving up my desires. I am attractive, and I have had many opportunities to go astray. But I made a commitment to be faithful to you during our wedding vows. Despite your own promises, you decided to break them, which in turn freed me from mine. I will not bring my women into this house so that you can see them. Looking at her, I realized that she believes that living together and spending time together will allow her to regain my trust. That was exactly what I wanted her to believe. So I decided to put a heavy burden on her. The only reason I agreed to live together is to avoid an expensive divorce and keep the comfort of my home. It is important for me to have a garage workshop and patio to enjoy life. Diana, you have two options: accept a new agreement or make a decision. If you decide not to live with the new state of things, you can either leave or take care of the household expenses, and I will move out. This is your opportunity to prove your love for me. You have the option to either agree to live together or take the house, as a result of which I will lose the garage workshop and patio, just as I lost my wife because of you. It's up to you. Is there any hope? I don't see her, Diana said after a short silence. Then how did she know about the photos taken on a mobile phone? Alls made up the story and passed it on to her husband a few days after I found Diana and North in her bedroom. I couldn't trust a word Diana said anymore. Although I couldn't bring myself to physically hurt her or kick her out of the house, I knew that ignoring her would be punishment in itself. I was sure that she still loved me and would try to regain my trust. But I was determined to make her suffer mentally by constantly being around her and pretending that she did not exist. It seemed unlikely that this would ever happen when I said that meeting North extinguished all my feelings for her. I wasn't kidding. But the longer she clung to hope, the longer my desire for revenge persisted. Having set in motion a plan to take revenge on Diana, I turned my attention to Stan and North. The private investigator's findings confirmed my suspicions. Despite the fact that I caught him and his wife found out about his infidelity, he was not going to slow down. Moreover, besides his wife, he had 5 other women. During the 3 weeks that he was being followed by private detectives, he did not take a single step towards Diana but instead became attracted to 2 of her colleagues. Mary Ellen Bingham, one of them, had a husband who worked the day shift every Tuesday and Thursday. After work, a man named North came to Mary Ellen's house on Sunflower Way. He stayed there for 2 hours and then left. Checking my watch, I noticed that if I followed his schedule, he would leave the house in 10 minutes. I parked one block from the house and the other from it. I parked the car and walked up to the Bingham house. Once behind the garage, I put on latex gloves and a ski mask. Mary Ellen's garage was designed for 3 cars, where North parked during his visits, ensuring his privacy by closing the garage door. I burst into the garage with a jackhammer, waiting for North to come out of the door leading into the house. Mary Ellen stood in the doorway and watched North walk to his car, stunned by the stun gun he writhed on the garage floor. Before Mary Ellen could react, I spoke in a disguised voice, warning her not to scream or call the police. I threatened that if she did, she would tell her husband about what was happening. I told her to go back inside and pretend that nothing was happening. I assured her that I would not harm North, but her husband, whom he had betrayed, would take revenge. Startled, Mary Ellen jumped back and slammed the door. Mary Ellen saw me at all the company meetings and parties that Diana brought me to, but I was counting on the ski mask and the altered voice to prevent her from identifying the person. Given the likelihood that she would turn to the authorities, I had to act quickly. Despite the fact that it was not easy to take off North's pants while he was convulsing, I managed to do it. And as soon as they were removed, I decided to take revenge. If North was proud of his masculinity, then he would pay for his arrogance. I grabbed a fully loaded cattle prod and punched it in the groin several times until it was completely discharged. Then I kicked him twice. After that, I snatched his wallet and checkbook from him and quickly drove away. As I was leaving, I couldn't help but wonder if Mary Ellen had alerted the police. Reflecting on my actions, I was full of uncertainty about what harm an electric shock could cause and what consequences it could lead to. I must admit, I liked North's screams when the cattle prod hit his private parts. I wonder how Mary Ellen handled the situation. Did she manage to extract North without her husband knowing about it? Or did she have to call for medical help and explain the situation to her husband? Without removing my latex gloves, I packed North's wallet and checkbook in a pre-prepared package and sent it to Alls at her office. There was no note, and I denied knowing about the package. When her husband returned home in pain and then his wallet appeared in the mail, she immediately suspected who was to blame. 3 weeks after my brief acquaintance with North, Alls called me. "Will you be free for lunch?" she asked. "I didn't plan anything," I replied. "Why?" she asked. "I think it's time for us to meet in person." "How about an evening at the Leo?" she suggested. "I'll be a redhead, and I'll skin every man who comes in to see if I can spot you." At noon, I agreed. When I arrived, I didn't see her nervously studying faces, but it was easy to recognize her. She was the only redhead sitting alone in the restaurant. North was a complete fool to cheat on such an amazing woman. I went over to her table and greeted her as Mrs. North, but she corrected me, reminding me to call her Alls. Sitting down at the table, I asked about the reason for our meeting at lunch. She just wanted to get to know the man who had wreaked havoc in her life. Confused, I asked how I could be to blame for this. "You made me face the reality of what I suspected but didn't want to believe. And it was when I agreed to give him another chance that you took away the only thing that set him apart from the rest." "I can't understand what you're talking about. Stan is a good breadwinner and father, but his strongest asset was his mastery of the bedroom, and now it's gone. You know what you did. Don't pretend you're innocent, Frank. We both know who damaged Stan's parts." "I have no idea what you're talking about. Anyway, after everything that's happened, Stan can't make love. Don't try to deny it, because sending wallets by mail is your signature move." At that moment, the waitress came over to take our order. Alls ordered a salad and iced tea, and I stole a glance at her. Her husband must really be an idiot. Alls was not only beautiful but also very smart, as I soon discovered. "Well, what is it?" she asked, catching me off guard. "Well, what?" I replied, confused. "Am I coming through?" "What is it?" she asked, making me even more confused. "What are you talking about?" I stuttered. "What I shouldn't have noticed, that you were just looking at me," she teased. Caught red-handed, I could only smile stupidly and answer, "To whom?" "Yes, at me. And I hope you like what you see because the real reason for this little meeting is to offer it to you," she continued, not at all surprised by my obvious surprise. I couldn't decipher the expression on my face, but she kept talking. I have a high libido, and since you took the toy away from me, it's only fair that you take over his duties. Caught off guard, I didn't know what to say. She smiled and said, I'm sure you didn't expect this, did you? To be honest, I didn't think about it, she continued. You've deprived me of a bed partner, so it's only fair that you take his place. What could be better than to take revenge on your wife and my husband? I do not know, or ruse, it's impressive, but I'm not sure it's wise. This may complicate my current situation and give Diana a reason to divorce. You're not going to divorce her? I described my actions to her, and she found them funny. You're very cunning, aren't you? But don't worry, I'm not going to make it public. If Stan doesn't regain access to his equipment, I'll consider a divorce, and I don't want him to have grounds for a counterclaim. Are you really sticking to this plan? You're just a goddess. My affair with Aruz North began a year ago and shows no signs of ending soon. Her husband was pushed toward me by his inability to achieve full strength in bed. Despite the fact that doctors did not find the physical cause of his problem, Aruz gave him until the end of the year to fix the situation, otherwise, she would leave. Diana doesn't know who I'm dating, but knowing about my infidelity eats her up from the inside. She's holding on, hoping for a miracle, and I couldn't have asked for better revenge. Story 3. It was a warm evening, the heat was over 30 degrees. A light breeze came through the window, causing the curtains to periodically sway. On the opposite wall hung the kitchen clock, which loudly struck the minutes in the silence of the room. But Ken Weber didn't pay attention to the breeze or the clock. All his thoughts were occupied with something internal. Confused and angry, Ken was still trying to make sense of what he had witnessed that evening. After all, he wanted to surprise his future bride by simply showing up at her office. He expected to be away for 5 days, but training was unexpectedly interrupted for a day due to the illness of the leading coach. When he arrived at her office building, he saw that the workers were leaving and quickly noticed Connie's tall, slender figure among them. He was about to greet her but hesitated when he saw a man next to her. They seemed to be completely absorbed in each other, oblivious to his presence just a few yards away. Ken was stunned by their proximity, and it made him pause before approaching them. Connie wrapped her arms around his arm and chatted animatedly, her eyes sparkling. Ken stood in shock, unable to think clearly, shaking his head. He quickly followed the happy couple to the parking lot next to the office building. They walked along the last row of cars until Ken saw that they were approaching Connie's silver Jaguar, given to her by her parents for her 24th birthday that spring. They didn't seem to notice the few people around. Ken's heart almost stopped when he saw how Connie leaned over to Chuck Moore, put her hand behind his head, and pulled him to her in a deep, prolonged kiss. Chuck's hand moved to her back and squeezed it gently. Connie's laughter pierced Ken's heart like a dagger. He couldn't look at it anymore. Ken turned around and hurriedly drove out of the parking lot. Once outside, he hitched a ride in a taxi and headed home. After meeting Connie Sterling, Ken Weber had a lot to think about. Finding himself in an unexpected place at a church meeting for single people, 24-year-old Ken found himself in a situation that he could not refuse. Having graduated as a financier 2 years ago, he was doing well in his job at an investment bank. The president of the bank took Ken under his wing as a mentor, so it was difficult for Ken to refuse the invitation. Sterling, the president of the bank, caught Ken in the hallway and, pressing his hand to his chest, spoke in a deep, rumbling voice. Horace Sterling grinned at Ken, acknowledging that he had worked hard both at the office and at school. It's time for you to take a break and meet new people. Who knows, maybe you'll even find a girl who will attract your attention, he added. Sterling expressed surprise that Ken does not attend church, saying it is important for him to be part of the church community for spiritual guidance. Lately, Sterling has been showing a special interest in Ken for unknown reasons. Ken felt awkward in Sterling's presence. Sterling, who also held the title of deacon in the church, was married to Margaret, who headed the women's auxiliary service and oversaw all social issues in the church. Ken forced himself to smile despite his dislike of Sterling, whom he considered a hypocritical and unethical businessman. He knew that this place was not for him in the long run. Ken decided to stay for a few more years to gain experience but was already making plans for the rest of his life after receiving his MBA degree in a few months. When Sterling invited him to an event, Ken hesitated but agreed, not wanting to disappoint him. When Ling left, Ken watched him go with a sense of anxiety. A sturdy man walked down the corridor, swaying slightly. "I don't know if I can take 2 more years," he whispered to himself as he headed for his office. "Hi, Ken, it looks like Dad has bewitched you," Reggie teased from the doorway. Ken raised his head and giggled weakly. "Hi, Reg, come in and relax." Reggie Sterling, Horace's son, was very different from his father. He was tall, blonde, slim, and witty. He and Ken developed a friendly relationship, and Ken was amazed by his new friend's admission that he became vice president of public relations only because he considered himself not talented enough for something else. He boasted about his popularity with women, claiming that their husbands did not see him as a threat. Dad made him vice president, which he thought was a decent deal. Ken laughed at his self-deprecating humor in the tone of a British aristocrat, poking fun at the pretentiousness of his own family. When Reggie asked what the old man wanted from him now, Ken explained that Sterling had his eye on him and made an invitation that looked more like an order. Ken didn't know why Reggie's father needed him, as it didn't seem to have anything to do with him at all. Reggie suggested that perhaps Sterling was worried about Ken's soul and found humor in the idea. He grinned as he stood up and assured Ken, "Don't worry, I'll keep an eye on you. If something suspicious happens, I'll figure it out." Waving his hand, he left the office. Ken watched him go, and confusion showed on his face. Shaking himself, he returned to the papers on his desk. Ken wasn't naive. He knew he had to show up to please Sterling. So, the following Saturday evening, he parked his car and casually entered the majestic, ostentatious church. A crowd of people were moving in the same direction, and he found himself being carried into the main ballroom of the building. Looking around, he noticed that despite the fact that this event was for singles, there were many older and middle-aged couples present. This puzzled him until he realized that most couples were accompanied by much younger single women. "It's like a debutante ball for single female parishioners," Ken chuckled to himself. "Oh no," he muttered, "not this guy." "Ken, my boy," a loud voice came from behind him. "I'm so glad you decided to come to this little meeting. I told my wife that you would be here. Let me introduce you." Sterling, a big man, put his hand on Ken's shoulder and turned him around. In front of Ken stood a heavy-set, imposing woman with a gaze studying him like a model. Ken quickly shook her hand, resisting the urge to bow and kiss the huge stone on her finger. He had to stifle a laugh at the sight. "It's very nice to meet you, Mrs. Sterling," he said with a fake smile. Mrs. Sterling forced herself to smile back, though it was more like a grimace, and motioned her husband over. "Thank you, Ken," she said in a nasal voice, clearly in need of an adenoid cleanse. "Let me introduce you to our daughter. This is Constance," she said, practically yanking a tall blonde woman from behind her back. Ken was stunned by the unexpected performance. It was hard to understand. Despite the unattractive nature of her parents, Sterling, it remained a mystery how they were able to produce such a beautiful woman. Constance was tall, slightly shorter than his own height even in high heels. Her blonde hair fell to her shoulders, framing deep blue eyes that were now filled with anger and a hint of embarrassment. Ken pulled himself together and quickly turned to her, expressing his pleasure at meeting her and asking her to invite him to an evening dance. He tried not to let her parents notice how he winked at her and smiled sympathetically. She gave him a puzzled look for a moment and then smiled. "Thank you, Mr. Weber." "I think it's possible," she said in a low tone. Ken smiled to himself, surprised that she knew his last name. "Well, that's pretty obvious," he thought to himself. It looked like the ogres had identified him as potential marriage material, which was strange. He did not belong to the secular circle and did not have the necessary financial means for such an honor. Ken considered the situation, realizing that it required reflection. As soon as the orchestra started playing, he did not fail to ask Constance to dance. "It looks like the older generation has some plans, doesn't it?" he remarked with a grin. Constance gave him a thoughtful look. "You understand everything quickly, don't you?" Ken grinned. It wasn't that hard to figure out. Constance's disappointment showed on her face. I apologize for that. It's kind of awkward, but they insisted that I join them tonight, and since I still live at home, I had no choice. I had a really good time tonight, Ken. Ken smiled, feeling the warmth in his chest. Me too, Connie. I really like your company. When they reached the car, Ken hesitated for a moment before taking Connie's hand. I hope it's not too sudden, but would you like to go on a date with me again? Connie's eyes sparkled with delight. With pleasure, Ken. And that's how their relationship began to blossom. Ken began to spend more and more time with Connie, getting to know her deeper and deeper. He was attracted to her kindness, intelligence, and sense of humor. Margaret and Horace Sterling, Connie's parents, quickly fell in love with Ken. They saw how he pleased their daughter and how well they complemented each other. Soon, they began to consider Ken as a potential son-in-law as Ken and Connie's relationship developed. Ken realized he had to be careful. He didn't want to make any mistakes that could jeopardize their future together. But as they spent more and more time together, Ken couldn't shake the feeling of excitement and hope that he and Connie had a future ahead of them. Resting her head on Ken's shoulder, she quietly suggested, "Darling, let's go back inside. It's starting to get cold in here." Ken's disappointment was obvious as he realized that he would have to face a difficult situation again. Looking at him, Connie casually remarked, "Oh, Ken, did I forget to tell you? Mom and Dad are away for the weekend. Tonight, they went to visit my aunt. They won't be back for 2 days." She paused, smiling mischievously at him. Back at the house, Ken no longer worried about proper behavior. As soon as they entered the house, Connie wasted no time in tucking them into her bed. She was insatiable, and passionate lovemaking quickly brought them to a climax. Ken lay next to her, catching his breath. "Wow, Connie, if making love to you feels like that, then I probably need a vitamin supplement," he joked. He couldn't take his eyes off her bronzed skin, glistening with sweat. "You better stock up, big boy," she teased. "I love making love, especially when it's with you," she whispered sweetly, bending down. She suddenly kissed him. "Do you love me, Kenny?" "What is it?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Tell me you love me," she demanded. Ken took her by the shoulders and looked into her eyes. "You know what? I think I do. I think I've fallen in love with you, Connie Sterling," he said. "I'm glad," she purred. "Because I love you, and I want to be with you forever, Kenny." Connie landed on his back, a brave act that caused a stir in society when their engagement was announced. The local newspaper published their love story on the front page, with photos of proud Horace and Margaret Sterling with Connie. Ken's photo was placed on page 6, which meant a change in his career at the bank. He was given more responsibility, and it became clear that he was being prepared for a serious promotion. Despite his success, Ken's conscience weighed on him. He understood that the increase in the amount of work was due to his upcoming marriage, but he did not know how to cope with the situation. He hoped to move up the career ladder based on his own merits and not on a relationship with the boss's daughter. A few months after the announcement of the engagement, Reggie Sterling casually walked into Ken's office and relaxed in the chair in front of his desk. "How are things going, Ken? Has Carol settled into her new role well? I suppose she's working as an administrative assistant now, right?" Ken smiled warmly back. "She serves as the personal assistant to the Director of Human Resources at K's Advertising in the city, Reg." Ken's tone softened the impact of his words. Reggie nodded absently, his discomfort evident as he shifted in his chair. "Kenny, I know I've already congratulated you, but there's something important that I think you should know. I thought for a long time whether it was worth sharing this with you, but in the end, I decided that you should know." Ken looked at his friend in confusion, noting Reggie's unusual solemnity. "Okay, Reg, what's so important?" Reggie took a deep breath before saying, "At the beginning of last year, even before you met Connie, she had an abortion. The elders were shocked, and you can imagine what happened next. Moreover, despite the fact that she was taken to another state for the procedure, it was a difficult time for her. Some information got online, and Connie was considered tainted in the eyes of our forgiving and kind community. Do you understand the plan now, Kenny? That's why my parents dragged you into this. You were a young, inexperienced banker with the right qualifications. You were educated, graduated from a prestigious school, and showed great promise. Besides, you didn't know about Connie's situation, so in the end, she could have a successful husband, a good income, and a respected position in society." Reggie fell silent, trying to maintain eye contact with Ken. Reggie hesitated before finally speaking. Ken was silent, considering the information he had received, and his curiosity was aroused. "That was before you and Connie met," Reggie confirmed, prompting Ken to ask further questions. Reggie paced back and forth, clearly upset, and finally decided to confess. "I'm sorry, Ken. I've been thinking about it for a long time, but I thought you should know," Reggie admitted with a heavy sigh. Ken nodded in understanding and demanded details. "Who was that, Ray? Was he the father of her child? What is it?" he asked. Reggie, feeling awkward, shared his suspicions. "Connie was involved with Chuck Moore, an assistant pastor at our fraternal community in Downingtown. They were close, but when Connie got pregnant, Chuck disappeared. He hasn't been seen around since," Reggie explained. Ken put all the information together, realizing the truth, although it was all based on assumptions. Ken nodded in agreement. "Yes, just a guess," he muttered. Reggie leaned closer, expressing his concern. "Kenny, I felt it necessary to tell you about this, but I want you to know that it doesn't change anything. I wanted you to hear it from me now, not from someone malicious who might try to cause trouble later. I know Connie loves you, and it's obvious that you love her. What happened is in the past. You didn't even know each other. You understand that, don't you, Ken?" Ken nodded again. "All right, Ray, I understand, and you're probably right. It happened before we crossed paths. I don't see anything wrong with that. But I'm grateful that you informed me. Things like this would have surfaced sooner or later, so now I can be ready. Thanks, Reg." Reggie breathed a sigh of relief, and a smile spread across his face. "Redo, Ken, old boy. That's the spirit. I am looking forward to the upcoming events," he said, leaving the office and waving goodbye. Ken sat in silence for a while, feeling more insecure than he wanted to admit. His mind was racing. Before they met, it didn't seem like anything special to him. He didn't mind. Still, there was a slight sense of unease lurking in the back of his mind. The wedding date was getting closer every day. Ken and Connie were getting married in 3 months, and preparations for this momentous day were in full swing. Caterers and musicians were hired, a ballroom was reserved, flowers were ordered, and the guest list was compiled, revised, and compiled again. Ken's parents tragically died in a plane crash when he was in college, and he was left the only child with a small guest list at the upcoming event. In contrast, Sterling's list included more than 350 guests, including family members, friends, colleagues, and prominent public figures such as the mayor, congressmen, and business owners. As a result, about 400 people gathered, and Ken recognized the scale of the event but did not feel burdened by it. He took minimal part in the planning and was content to leave everything in the hands of others. He didn't like extravagant displays, but for some reason, the information Reggie had shared bothered him. It occurred to him that all this had happened before he met Connie, and he couldn't understand why he couldn't just forget about it. But this feeling did not leave him. Deciding that he needed more information, Ken grabbed the phone book and dialed the number. "Hi, Pete, this is Ken Weber," he said when he heard the voice of a fraternity brother. "Kenny! It's good to hear from you. It's been too long, wow, almost 3 years," Pete Pender exclaimed. Pete and Ken were close in college, but as often happened, they drifted apart after graduation. "Yes, Pete, it's a pity. We should meet for a drink or something. I don't go to the city very often, but maybe I'll stop by this week, and we'll meet," Ken suggested. "Of course, Kenny, I'd be glad. But first, tell me what's on your mind." "I know that you decided to contact an old friend for a reason," Pender asked. "As always, you're right, Pete. I think I need to enlist your services. I'll fill you in when we meet." "How about Thursday night at the Rittenhouse?" suggested Ken. After a moment of silence, Pete agreed. "Okay, Ken, I'll see you there. You've piqued my curiosity. Oh, and congratulations on the upcoming wedding, I saw it in the newspaper." Pete Linderman was the son of Hugh Pender, a partner at Pender and Renderman, a prestigious law firm in Center City. Elite clients turned to the firm's services to resolve confidential and sensitive issues, and the firm gained a prestigious reputation for being able to conduct business with the utmost care so as not to offend high society. Ken Weber asked his friend for a favor, to discreetly gather information about an assistant pastor named Charles Moore. Ken knew about the firm's exceptional internal investigation team, having discussed it with Pete back in college. Pete was naturally curious, but he was a quick learner. He agreed to comply with Ken's request but asked to keep him informed of the rest of the events as they unfolded. Soon, Ken received a large envelope with detailed information about the pastor's assistant. The documents contained information about his early biography, but the most intriguing details appeared when Ken read about how Moore studied at the divinity school. It turned out that Moore had transferred from a school in the Midwest to a sister school on the East Coast just before his senior year. There were rumors that Moore impregnated a fellow student, which caused her to drop out of school, but there was no concrete evidence linking him to this situation. Constant rumors were most likely the reason for his transfer. The information provided was vague and based on gossip and speculation. There was mention of a strange relationship between Moore and some married members of his community. Moore's relationship with Connie Sterling was mentioned in passing, but there was no talk of any pregnancy or abortion. Apparently, the Sterlings carefully hid this information from outsiders. The last item found in the envelope was a large photograph of Charles Moore. Ken didn't look at it for long. Moore was depicted as a tall, slender man with dark hair, wearing a sports coat and a polo shirt. In the photo, he was captured smiling slightly, moving away from the camera. Ken carefully returned the photo to the envelope, fastened the clasp, and put the envelope in the briefcase. Ken Weber turned his chair around and looked out the office window, lost in thought. Glancing at the kitchen clock, he realized that he had been sitting and thinking for almost 2 hours. Getting up from his chair, he stretched and headed to the bar in the living room, where he poured himself a glass of scotch with several ice cubes. Savoring the drink, he went to the glass doors, opened them, and went out onto the balcony of his apartment. Leaning on the railing, he looked up at the night sky, decorated with countless twinkling stars. Ken raised his glass in a toast, a bitter smile playing on his lips. He understood the task ahead of him. Swallowing, he finished his drink and returned to the living room, putting the empty glass on the end table. Picking up the phone, he dialed a familiar number. "It's time to put your plan into action." "Hello, Pete, this is Ken." The conversation was short. In less than 2 weeks, Ken got everything he needed. In Pete's office, Ken was casually flipping through a stack of photographs. "I'm sorry, Kenny," he muttered with a note of detachment. "They've been fighting since we started the investigation. They were not too careful in their actions. They were often seen together as if she wanted to be caught," Pete whispered. Ken silently agreed. "I'm impressed that you managed to take such clear photos." "Where were they made?" Ken asked. "They rented a motel hot room in Jersey for half a day, right across the river. The curtains weren't properly closed, so my boyfriend was able to take some pictures in between," Pete explained. Ken chuckled. "Yeah, it looks like they weren't very careful. They lacked intelligence. It was obvious because they stayed at the very bottom of the frame." Pete hesitated and made a face. "I'm sorry, Ken," he said. Just a few weeks before the wedding, Ken was proud of his skills, maintaining a consistent demeanor at the bank and with Connie and her parents. Despite his inner turmoil, he remained loving and attentive to his future bride. In bed, he was able to relax when necessary, although it took a lot of willpower to do so. Meanwhile, the preparations for the wedding continued. Ken felt a sense of satisfaction every time Horace Sterling complained about the exorbitant cost of the upcoming event. The price tag was approaching 6 figures, but Margaret and Connie easily dismissed his concerns. It was in the evening, shortly before the wedding, after they had finished their intimate moment. Ken couldn't shake the feeling that it was just a physical release. When Connie turned to him and asked, "What's next, Kenny?" Ken was stunned. "What do you mean, dear?" he replied. Connie sighed impatiently. "You seem pleased with yourself, Ken. You look so smug and pleased with yourself. I can tell you have something up your sleeve for me. Come on, spit it out." It took Ken a lot of effort not to burst out laughing. He restrained himself and tried to calm her curiosity. "Honey, you're going to have to wait for a surprise. Let's just say it's connected to our honeymoon." "Yes, happy honeymoon." "I had a feeling." "Are we going to Paris, Kenny?" "Our honeymoon will be in Paris," Connie said with a smile. "This is a surprise, my love. I'll tell you the details after the wedding. You'll have to wait and see." After the ceremony, Ken mingled with the guests, accepting congratulations and smiling at everyone as he made his way to the stage. He noticed something that delighted him. Charles Moore was invited as a guest. Ken took the microphone from an MC and made sure it was working before addressing the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, friends," he said, pausing to look around the great hall as the noise subsided. "I want to express my gratitude to all of you for coming, some even from afar, to support me and my bride on our wedding day. Doesn't she look stunning in her beautiful white dress?" After the applause died down, Ken continued to speak. "I want to express my gratitude to my father-in-law and mother-in-law for giving such a wonderful reception. Let's applaud them again." Ken smiled at his in-laws and wanted to express his gratitude by giving each of them a special gift. "You will find a large envelope under each chair. Please take one and open it right now." The guests hurried to get their envelopes, but those who were sitting at the main table were puzzled. There were no envelopes for them. Inside each envelope was a glossy photograph of the bride and Charles Moore, with scrupulous attention to detail. They entered into an intimate relationship. The audience reacted with shock, sighs, and laughter. Ken spoke louder, addressing his fiancée with a declaration of divorce and wishing her an unhappy life. Then he turned around and left the room. The next day, Ken wrote a letter of resignation and left town. He revealed the truth, and Connie's act will be talked about in society for a long time. This news was even published in the newspaper. Connie and her family were disgraced.